Welcome back, everyone. So we're going to work our way through everyone with our quick updates. This is twofold. The reason we're doing this is twofold. One is so we can all hear what each other is working on and where we are in the process and kind of have a good sense for where the group is. But the other is if you hear something in someone's update that you think is really either interesting, you have questions about, is something you want to do that you haven't done yet, I hope you all feel comfortable enough to reach out to one another via private message. You have the contact list, so via email, and just ask more about it. We obviously can't get into a ton of depth in a 1-minute update. So use this opportunity to jot down something you might want to follow up with someone else about, and you can ask them more about it, because you're all doing, there's some through lines in what you're doing, but you're also doing really interesting and different things too. So with that, I'm going to start with the first person in my top left. We'll popcorn it around the same way we did with our intros. So Girl Scouts team, Sheena, you're in my top left if you want to go first and give us a 1-minute update on your evaluation project.
I got you, Sheena. We're still in analysis phase. We've done analysis on our registration information. Thank you, Elena, for all of your help with that. And now we're working on analysis of our survey data. We've gotten about 240 responses from our camp participants. I'm not anticipating any more at this point because it's been about a month since camp ended. So I think it's safe to do analysis now. That's where we're at.
Good work. Cool. All right, pass it over.
I'll go with the next person in my view, and that's the Lutz Children's Museum.
Morning, everybody. So we are in the coding phase of our data. We have 316 respondents to our survey. We have not held our focus group yet. However, we realize that our data is biased in that the only respondents are those who entered the museum. So we have 4 events that we are attending by the end of this month. Those would be individuals who have not gone to the museum. They'll be completing our survey. So we've been accepted to the Association of Children's Museums National Conference. So our session is going to be entitled Individual, Societal, and Economic Value of Children's Museums. The conference is in May. It's in Madison, Wisconsin. So that's where we are right now.
Super exciting. Thank you. And then go ahead and pass it over to somebody else.
Connecticut, please.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So for us, we have, completed our surveys. We've done them. We've crunched the numbers, and now we are working on our annual report. So we're working on utilizing the graphics that we talked about the last couple of sessions. We also have done our observations. We did a test run last year, and we kind of went over and talked about the things that were good and not good. And so we plan to hopefully do those again this year. And we are going to start doing record review. I know that previously, I don't know if we talked about this, but we were talking about getting report cards from the students to really track academic progress. And luckily enough, Hartford Public Schools is giving us some good access to be able to see the students' records. And so now we'll really be able to track academic growth. So we're really excited about that.
That's great. Who do you want to pass it over to?
Oh, yes, sorry. YWCA.
Good morning. All right, so Tina and I are still in the process of collecting. It's been a little bit slower for us just because the type of program we're surveying, and we don't have that many exits. So our numbers are not as big as some that we've heard. But we are starting from what we have, the analysis piece as well from what we have.
And I'm going to take a moment right there to remind everyone too, that we're all doing very different projects, right? The through line is that we're answering a question or questions about our organization or about our programming or about our team. But the scope, the scale, the types of questions, the types of methods are different. So there's no expectation of what numbers look like, of what methods look like, because you're doing the type of evaluation that makes sense for, or the type of project that makes sense for the program and the context that you have. And Luciana, go ahead and pass it over to whoever we have. Camp Current, Hartford Performs, CERC, and Mutual Housing left.
Mutual Housing.
Morning, everyone. So we've decided to time the release of our surveys with these property meetings that we're having. We launched. We have 17 properties. We've broken them up into groups of about 100 residents per group, and each month we are hosting an engagement session. And the reason that we're doing this with the survey is we're following up on those meetings with the survey. So we had our first property meeting a couple weeks ago, and the surveys developed in both English and Spanish are now deployed to those 3 properties. So we're waiting for the information to come back. We also understand that in some cases, some of our residents don't have access to the online version of the survey, which we've deployed through the community websites. Each property has its own website. So we also put mailboxes at those properties and printed out paper surveys that encourage people, and it was distributed to everyone that way too. So we're hoping that over the next couple of weeks we'll have some good data, and then beginning in October there's another 3 properties and another survey that'll go out, and then every 6 months that whole process will repeat.
Good work. And then you can pass it over to Hartford Performs.
Hartford Performs, take it.
Okay, thanks, Paul. I'll do it. Okay, we successfully completed 7 artists and residencies at our 4 middle schools in Hartford Public Schools. 5 of those residencies got our full implementation of our evaluations through surveys, observations, and interviews. We were able to analyze that data and pull together an outcomes report, which we share with the Hartford Board of Education as well as our own governing board. And it will eventually go up on our website. We are currently doing some reflection and some revisions on how we're going to implement for this next school year in our new residencies. And Paul sharing, we talked and thought it's a great idea. We should translate one of our student surveys into Spanish, making it available in Spanish. So thanks, Paul. We're going to take that. And I'm sorry, I don't know who is next.
CERC or Camp Current?
Camp Current.
Hi, we are, we're still in our analyzing stage. We've taken a couple of surveys. We had to take kind of a break for our summer program, and now we're back into the program that we're evaluating. So we're just now starting to get into that analyzing stage and putting all the data together.
And then last but not least, our friends at CERC.
Hi, everybody. So we have sent out our survey to our team, which ours is a little bit different. We're working internally in terms of our evaluation, if you guys remember. So we sent out our survey to all of the staff. We have since been analyzing the data that we received. Thank you, Elena, for all of your work, because it helped us to summarize common themes and things like that. So at this point, we have actually shared that information back to our team, just to kind of like a touch point as to where we are. and the plan for where we're going. So we were talking about with them the next steps, which would be focus groups. So breaking down the information that we analyze and really getting their support in trying to determine what would be best for us, because ultimately our internal evaluation is about them. But that's where we are.
Can we just take a moment? I don't think we do this enough in our work period, but certainly not in this process. Can we just take a moment and acknowledge all of the time and effort and work that you all have put into this so far? I mean, just time-wise, right? It's been over a year of meetings and homework assignments and sessions. But just hearing all of your updates, sometimes when you're in it, you don't realize how far you've gotten, right? But sitting back and hearing all of these updates, you all have done a significant amount of work and really good thinking, and really, really strong evaluation efforts. And so just pat yourselves on the back. Good work, good work. It's not done, right? We're not done. And hopefully it's not done even when this project is done, right? Because the idea is that you can take this back and continue to embed it in the work that you're doing. But let's just take a moment to celebrate that. And actually, that is a great transition to this next slide. So here's what we've covered so far in our building evaluation capacity stuff, right? It feels like a really, really long time ago, but we talked about evaluation basics, some key terms that you all are throwing around now like experts. We talked about theories of change and logic models, so why we do X and what we expect to change and the goals that we have. We talked about evaluation questions and how we establish them. We talked about each of these different data collection methods, right? Surveys that everyone is doing, record reviews that some of you are doing, observations that some of you are doing, focus groups and interviews that some of you are doing. We talked about analyzing the data that many of you are working on now or have wrapped up. And so we've covered a lot. We've got a little bit left. So here's what's coming up. So we have our session today, right, on reporting and on using the data. In October, we have individual meetings. So like we had over the summer, right, our one-on-one meetings, depending on where you are to move things forward. We have one more group session like this one in November. So November 7th, hopefully you have that on your calendar. It's our last big group session on Zoom like this, where we will cover kind of putting it all together, and we're going to try out this peer supervision table. So you'll have a lot of time with each other during that session. Very little, a little bit of content, and then a lot of time with each other. We can also continue individual meetings as needed. So if you're in deep in analysis or you're working on writing some stuff up, I hope at this point you're all comfortable enough to just reach out to me when you need something. But I just want to be explicit that if we need it in November too, we can do individual meetings. And then December 12th, we put on our caps and gowns, no caps and gowns, but we meet in person. So put this on your calendars, December 12th. Roughly hold 9:30 to 12:30. So it's a 3-hour chunk like we have now, but maybe we'll just shift it by 30 minutes so people can get there in person. And we will present and celebrate and eat. And if you're a hugger, we can hug and just really celebrate all your good work. So this is what's left in our engagement. And then I didn't put it on here. There'll be a follow-up survey. So you'll get a survey from me. It wouldn't be a good evaluation curriculum if I didn't send you a survey, right, to assess your own outcomes and all of this. So following the graduation, you'll get a survey from me, and I hope you will each individually complete it so we can use that information to improve the programming that we provide. So that's what's left. That's what's coming down the pipe. That December session is going to be 90% all of you. So we might have some intro remarks from the foundation. I might say like 5 minutes worth of stuff, but then it's really all about you. So there's a little bit of homework leading up to it. Each group will present for 10 minutes at that session, each of our teams. So each of you will present for 10 minutes. It's not a lot of time. All of your team members should ideally have a role in that presentation. So it shouldn't just be one person presenting on behalf of the group, right? Everyone that's been in this process should be, should have the floor for at least one of your slides. I'm recommending that you use a slide deck. You don't have to. You can just talk if you want to talk, but I'm strongly recommending it in case you need the visual, in case you need something to keep you focused. Any slides that you work on will be due by 5 p.m. on November 30th. You have to send them to me, because what I will do is put them in one cohesive slide deck so we can move through, because the way the day is going to be set up is intro remarks from the foundation, couple words from me, and then organizational presentation, couple breaks, right? But we'll work through everybody. So I'll set them up ahead of time, so we just move through the slides and don't have a lot of transition time. So you'll have to send those to me by the 30th, so I can get them all together, follow up with you if there are questions, right? And then get them all ready to go and over to the foundation in preparation for our session on December 12th. So what to include, you'll get this, by the way, this is all in the slides that Monica will so wonderfully put on the BEC site for us. So this is what you want to include in your presentation. You want to introduce your organization, you want to introduce your team, right? Tell us in like 10 sentences what you all do, so we know. Share the evaluation questions that you intended to answer with this. Share the methods that you selected and why. So we did a survey because X, we did record review because Y. Share your key findings, bullets are fine, with at least one visual, right? So if you created, some of you created amazing graphs, charts, include a visual in there. Show off your work a little bit. And then the so what. So the impact of your findings. So as a result, we did this, or we shared this, or we told our partners this, or we changed this. You might not know yet, right? So you might still be heavily in analysis or heavily in data collection. So you might not know the impact of your findings yet. So talk about what you plan to answer. So once we know, right, we'll be able to answer the question of, do we need to tweak anything? Do we need to, whatever it might be. And then run through that presentation. My hunch is that will take you 10 minutes and then some. But if you find that you have more time beyond that, you can reflect on the process a little bit. Something that you found tough, something that was fun, a skill that you learned, what you'll take going forward, something you really didn't like. Only include that piece if you have more to share after you've done, more time left after you've done the other pieces. My hunch is between the introductions, the evaluation questions, the methods and the findings and the impact, you will hit that 10 minutes, and you'll probably have to cut some stuff out to hit that 10 minutes. Questions about any of that? Nothing? All right, as you start to work on these things, if you have questions, you know where to find me. Again, you'll have this slide to work from. You don't have to use any sort of template. You can use whatever slide deck you use at your organization. So you don't all, I'm not expecting that they all look the same. In fact, the deck will be really boring if they all look the same. So use whatever layout you all feel comfortable in. Just make sure you include the key points. And then this is also an opportunity where if you want to invite others from your organization, I'm looking at Monica because I think that's still the case, right? They can invite other people from their organization to come to the graduation. Is that right?
Yes. Yep. We open it up.
So at some point, I'm sure Monica will need a head count. But just keep that in mind too. If there's someone else that wasn't part of the BEC team, but that you'd like to invite to come hear your remarks and also just enjoy the morning together, they're welcome to do that. There'll be a little, at the end of all the presentations, we'll have a little, opportunity for photos and that sort of thing. So they might want to be there for some of that. All right. So now, reporting evaluation findings, our content for the morning. This next slide should look incredibly familiar. We already know, right, the 4 main ways that evaluation data are collected: surveys, interviews, observations, and record reviews. We've talked about them, right, at length. You all have done them at this point. You're experts on some of these things. We know that they have limitations and benefits. We know that all of them can either be used to collect quantitative or qualitative data. They all require preparation on the front end, like developing the instrument, testing the instrument, planning for the administration, and planning for the analysis. After you have done all of this, right, after your data are collected, this is where some of you are right now. After your data are collected, we analyze them and we summarize those results into findings. So when we use the term findings, we're talking about the summary of all the results. We then share those findings in a way that makes sense so they are digestible for our audience, right? This is what the Connecticut's team said that they were just doing. They're working on, like, right, how they're going to share that out using our various ways that we could share it out. And then ideally, we're not stopping at the sharing out, right? This is like the icing on top of the cherry on top of the cake, or the sundae. We are then developing some sort of action steps. The reality is many of us do evaluation because we have to. You have funders or partners, right, that need to know how well something is working, and you need to know the answer to that to share it out with them. It gets you more funding, it gets you more cheerleaders for your work. So for part of the reason that we do evaluation is for communication and case making. For some people, that is the only reason they do evaluation. Fine. There is also a huge, huge benefit in doing evaluation for the purpose of program improvement, right? And so for especially those of you that are already past the, or at or past the, we're putting together our report and we're sharing this out, there is a series of reflection conversations you can have to say, all right, this went really well, or this didn't, or here's what went well about it and here's what didn't. Regardless of what we're sharing out with our stakeholders, what does that mean for us for programming? And that conversation is really critical because, or really, it's not critical, you could move on without it, but the difference between an evaluative thinking organization and one that doesn't are the ones that sit down to take the time for that conversation. It's very easy to keep doing exactly what you're doing, but you all have done this work already. You might as well use that data and see if there are some tweaks you ought to make. Sometimes you have that conversation and you say, we're going to keep doing exactly what we're doing because the data suggests that it's working. And that's great. That's still data informed. The idea here isn't that you have to change something. The idea is that you're taking the time to reflect on whether or not there's anything to change based on what you're learning. You've all, I can't emphasize this enough, you've done the hard part already. You've done, or you're doing the work, right, of collecting the data and analyzing the data and aggregating and summarizing that data into findings. You're doing that anyway. You've run 24 miles of this marathon. Those last 2 miles, right, that last little bit of, and now let's sit and reflect and talk about what it means for our programming. That's the difference between ending the race at 24 miles or making it to 26.2 and finishing the marathon. I don't know if that analogy really worked once I started to say it, but go with me on it. So how do we actually use this stuff? The simplest way to do it is to fill in these blanks. If you need just a basic starting point, now that we know blank, and blank is the finding, one of your findings, now that we know that 50% of our participants are satisfied after they leave our program, we will do what? That could be we will do exactly what we did last year. That could be we will change this piece of it. That could be we will, actually, some of you have already done this, by the way. I'm going to call out CERC because they're a great example of it. And they're doing it with additional data collection. Crystal said it before. Now that we know X from our survey, we will do focus groups, right? To better understand some of the nuance of the responses. So your answer here might be additional data collection because we want to understand this deeper piece of the work. Totally valid and totally great evaluative thinking use, but the idea is that you're taking some sort of action based on what you learned. So now that we've learned this, now that we know this, we will do this. Lutz is doing it too, right? Now that we know that we heard from a lot of people that stepped into the museum, we will now go talk to people that have not stepped into the museum. It's an action based on what we've learned so far. We're going to come back to this in a few minutes, or in a little bit, to talk more about how we actually do something with the data. But before we go there, it's important to remind ourselves of a couple of things. Why we're reporting and what we're reporting anyway, right? All this assumes you've done data analysis and you've done some sort of interpretation of that data. So it's been a couple of months. We had the summer in between. Just to get our brains back into that data thinking mode, this is an activity. So on your piece of paper, we're going to do this individually, each person on their own. So on your piece of paper, in your Word document, whatever you have available, number your page 1 through 4. Give yourself 4 lines, 1, 2, 3, and 4. If you printed out the, if you went on the BEC site and you printed out or opened up the overview slides for today, you should have this slide. So if these numbers are too small and you need them to be bigger, grab them off of the BEC website. This slide should be on there for you. I'll also try and maybe zoom in a little bit to see if you can see them bigger. This is a quick activity. So the ASAP, this is real data. These are real data, by the way. ASAP project involved training high school graduates to increase their eligibility to get into a post-secondary program. People that graduated high school get additional training so they could be stronger candidates for post-secondary programming. Read each statement below. So there are 4 statements right here. You're going to read each of those. And then next to your 1, 2, 3, and 4, either write A if the statement is accurate based on the data that you see, or I if it's inaccurate, right? Basically true, false. In 2 of them, you're asked to fill in the blanks too for numbers 3 and 4. So you're basically using the table to determine whether the 4 statements below are accurate or inaccurate. Take about 5 minutes and work on this now. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit too on my end. And then we'll and then we'll reconvene and talk about the answers. I'm going to take it down, I think, for 1 second so I can share a different view that's going to be a little more zoomed in. So I'm going to stop the share. I'm going to reshare this view. Hopefully, this is a little bit easier to see. the vast majority of the Thanks, Monica. I think the vast majority of the group is done. So Boston did a better job than New York at recruitment. Is this accurate or inaccurate? I'm seeing some clapping. I'm seeing some check marks. What do we think? Someone unmute, give us your answer and tell us how you know. Who's our brave soul?
Yes, slightly better, 84% versus 81%.
Yeah, so they did, right? So this was their goal. This was their actual. The actual is a proportion of the goals. So New York got 81% of their recruitment goal. Boston got 84. So yes, Cleve is 100% right. It's slightly better, but they did do a slightly better job at New York than recruitment. So that is accurate. Second, a total of 87 New York participants, 92% of the goal, but only 39 Boston participants, 70% of the goal, completed the training. Accurate or inaccurate? Accurate or inaccurate?
That's accurate.
That's accurate, right? So we see it here. Training completion, 92% completed in New York, 70% completed in Boston. Those numbers are 39 and 87. How about the next one? Substantially more New York completers were accepted after 180 as compared to 30 days. And I ask you to fill this in. So is this true? Is this accurate or inaccurate? And then what would these numbers be? Go ahead, Christy.
I think it's
Vic Marie, go for it. Vic Marie, do this one, and Christy, do the next one.
okay. Yeah, it's the 48% to the 98%.
Yeah, so our 180-day number is 98%, right? And then our 30-day number is 48%. I get really nervous with quantifiers like this, substantially, right? Because like what technically is substantially? But in this case, with a point difference like this, I think it's fair to say. So accurate. Christy, what do you have for the last one? Same was also true for Boston. Accurate or inaccurate?
Also accurate, and it's 74% versus 54%.
Yeah, so these are the differences. Again, the thing that makes me a little bit nervous here is this term substantially. Is this a substantial difference? I might say yes, someone else might say no, but either way, Boston definitely did better 180 days later than they did 30 days later. So data interpretation, great. Someone though, imagine that you are program staff of this program. You see these data, and now you want to turn them into reflection and action statements for your team. So take another minute and write down, fill in that action statement that we talked about. Now that we know blank, pick any one of these data points. It could be the 4 that we talked about that are listed here, or it could be something else. Now that we know blank, we will do what? Put on the hat of program director for this program or program coordinator for this program and write down an action statement just based on what you see here. Now that we know blank, we will do what?
Could you repeat what you said, Elena?
Yep. So now pick any one of the findings from here, either the 4 at the bottom or something else that you see in the table. And wearing the hat of program staff, think about an action statement you would make or you would take based on the data and fill in the following. Now that we know blank, whatever finding you want to focus in on, we will do blank and fill in that second half. So for example, hopefully you don't use this one. Now that we know Boston did a better job than New York at recruitment, we will blank, right? And fill that in. Take one more minute and then we'll talk about a few of these. Now that we know blank, we will do what? Someone give us one of their action statements. What did you come up with? Now, Vic Marie has one in the chat. Now that we know more New York and Boston completers were accepted after 180 days over 30 days, we will do the training for 180 days only going forward. So if that's exactly right. If this training were either a 30-day training or 180-day training and you're comparing the two, right? You might only focus on the 180-day training. You have limited resources. Where are we going to focus? Or we're going to focus on this one because the findings are that much better. If that's how the program is set up, exactly right. My hunch is here that they're actually talking about acceptance into one of these post-secondary institutions and whether they're getting accepted 30 days later or 180 days later. And if that's the case, there's still an action step here, right? Now that we know that more New York and Boston completers were accepted over 180 days, over 30 days, maybe we don't even collect 30-day data anymore. Maybe we only collect at the 180-day mark, right? Or maybe if we have to do 30 days, we better beef up that 30-day programming because these numbers aren't where we need them to be at 30 days, depending on what that requirement is. So Vic Marie, awesome. Great use of data to design an actual intervention. What's another one? Now that we know what will we do? Give us one more. Go ahead, Lift Museum. I see you with your hand up.
Now that we know that virtually all of the participants accepted in New York, Boston is going to explore more what New York did differently.
Sure, right? So look at this, 98% of them were accepted after 180 days, 74%. 74 is still pretty good, but we have almost full acceptance here. So is there anything that our Boston team can do, similar, like learning from what worked in our New York team, that we can implement here to beef up these numbers too? So there's an exploration that's going to happen here. Absolutely right. There's something interesting here too. Look at this. We didn't talk about this one, but 92% of people completed the program in New York, 70% completed it in Boston, right? So maybe there's an intervention that can happen here because more people are completing it in New York too. So that's the way that we would use the information, right? Based on what we're learning. Let's do one more of these. I'm going to keep it on this weird behind the scenes view of PowerPoint so we can make it a little bit bigger. So one more. Interpreting results. This is performance and attendance. So this is people in the SOAR program and their test scores in reading, math, and writing. And people were either in a high intensity or a low intensity module. And then here's how they did in each of these three areas. So you have one statement below. You're going to indicate whether it's accurate or inaccurate. And then you're going to add another finding. So in this case, you're not getting all four findings. You're getting one. You're indicating whether it's accurate or inaccurate. And then you're writing a finding based on the table. So go ahead and take about 2 minutes, determine if this is accurate or inaccurate, and add your own finding below that. Once you've answered if this is accurate or inaccurate, and you've written your own finding, give me your reaction of choice, so I know that so I know who's done. All right, so proportionately more students with high intensity, 100 plus hours of after school attendance had proficient test scores. Is this accurate or inaccurate?
So I have a question about that. Does that mean that it's an equal number, an equal percentage or equal number of students did better with high intensity across the board? Because that's not the case.
So I didn't really talk about this part, but this is really, really important here. This finding is really confusing, or this statement is really confusing, right? It is really hard to answer this question because the way the statement is written can be interpreted in multiple ways. Do we mean percentage-wise? In which case, yes, right? Percentage-wise, they did better. Those that were in high intensity did better than those that were low intensity. So proportionately, yeah. But does this proportional mean based on numbers? Right? Does it mean because this is a smaller group than this group? So are we looking at raw numbers? Are we looking at the number that did better across each specific one? Totally unclear. So it could be sort of a trick question depending on how you interpret it. So my guess is some of you said this was accurate and some of you said it was inaccurate. Show of hands, who thought it was accurate? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, who thought it was inaccurate? A couple people. Who wasn't sure because of the way that the question was written? Or the statement was written. Yeah, right? So so that's why rather than focus on this one, give me a finding that you came up with on your own looking at the data. What's a finding that you came up with from this table? Just unmute and share it out.
So for me, I was a little confused, and the percentages were, anyways, I was confused. So I put high intensity students have a higher probability of receiving proficient test scores than those in low intensity.
Yeah, that's totally right, right? So if you're in higher intensity, this is proportion of people. Where's my mouse? This is the proportion of people that were high intensity that got proficient, that met proficiency. So what Kiara just said is completely right. Based on these data, right, if you're in high intensity, you're more likely to, or you got, if it's past tense, what happened, you got higher proficient test scores than their counterparts that were in low intensity. Good. What's another finding that you wrote down, someone else, based on what you saw here?
I did students with high intensity only scored slightly higher in math than low intensity students. So I disregarded the numbers up top and just focused on the percentages.
Also true. So if we look specifically at math, this is an 8 percentage point difference. That's not huge, right? So they did better, but Crystal quantified it. They did slightly better in math when they were in high intensity than when they were in low intensity. Also true. So now, and let's do this in real time. You don't have to write this down. what might be an action step? So now that we know something, we will what? Let's come up with an action step in real time. What's an action step we might take based on these findings? Now that we know something, what might we do? Someone give it a shot.
Increase the number of hours that students are practicing reading, math, or writing.
Sure,
Yeah,
right?
for low intensity students, I mean, maybe.
So now that we know that our high intensity students perform at least slightly better, if not significant, right? If not much better across these three areas, or reach proficiency across these areas, we might increase the number of hours that we're offering to all of our SOAR program participants. So this is the type of taking action step that we're talking about when we say we reflect on our data. And I'm going to switch back now to my regular screen and talk about what this might look like. Hold on. When we do it in practice. So if you're following along, I'm switching up the order of the slides because I think it makes more sense to look at this one right now. So now that we know blank, we will do blank. What are some ways that we can think about this in our own work? We can ask ourselves when we look at our data, what am I seeing in these data in these findings that I already knew? Right? Some things you already know, either from previous data, from your own intuition, you're just getting confirmation of things that you thought. So what am I seeing that I already knew? What is something new that I learned from it? Right? So the same way we looked at those tables, now those tables, we didn't already know any of that because those weren't our programs. But when you make data of your own, when you make tables of findings of your own program or your own staff, you're probably going to get some affirmations, some things you already knew. Then you're going to get some things, hopefully, that are new. So what am I seeing that I knew? What's something new that I learned? What are possible explanations for what we're seeing? This gets a little dicey because you don't want to draw too, you don't want to explain away too much of it without having the data. But this is a brainstorm. What are some possible explanations for what I'm seeing here? And then what could or should we do differently as a result? As a BEC evaluation team, these are questions you can ask yourselves as you look at your data. Then there are also other stakeholders. We'll talk about stakeholders in a few minutes, but there are other stakeholders that you might want to pull in for some of this too. So what you could do is create a document of your key findings, bullet list, or could just be a table like the one we just looked at. You could put your own data in a table like that, and then share that with select people and have a discussion about it. A sense-making and an action-oriented brainstorming discussion. In technical terms, this is strategizing and planning. Right? Where you sit down the same way we just did with that slide. You sit down and go, here are the data that we just saw in our survey that we just got back. Let's talk about these as a group. What findings do we see? And then is there anything we want to explore further? Is there anything that we might do as a result of it? And then longer term, you might actually go and try out a new strategy and then re-examine your data to see if it actually made a difference. So in the example we just talked about, right? Maybe we go back and if we're the SOAR program, we go back and we try out higher intensity programming, more higher intensity programming rather than lower intensity. And then we re-examine. We look at our test scores again the following year and see what has changed. In the example before that, the ASAP program. Maybe we are Boston and we're trying out some of the New York strategies, and then we're going back and crunching those numbers again a year later to see if our numbers have shifted. This is measuring and monitoring. Right? This is much longer term now. This is beyond the scope of the evaluation project, but this is the longer term implication of some of the actions that we're talking about taking. Questions about any of this? These discussions are these steps are usually best taken in discussion, or usually best established in discussion with a small brain trust. So maybe it's your BEC evaluation team, maybe it's your BEC evaluation team and a couple of additional people. They're usually done best when you have the opportunity to talk it through with somebody else. What if we did this? What are you seeing when you look at this? What questions do you have? If nothing else, you always have my number. Long after today, you call me and say, hey, I'm looking at these data. I need someone to talk them through. You do that whenever you want. Call me at any point. You have open access to me after being in this program. So if you need somebody to talk this through with, send me a table, right? Like the one that we just looked at, and say, what do we see here? What's important for us to note as a finding, and what do we do with it? I'm going to stop sharing for a second so we can all see each other better. Reactions about any of that? Questions or comments? Just making sense? Yeah. All right. So let's talk about stakeholders a little bit. Back to my share. So evaluation stakeholders. Stakeholders are people that care about, it's literally the word. They have a stake in, they hold a stake, they care about what happens in your organization or in your program. They might be the decision makers, so all of you are stakeholders. Your colleagues are stakeholders, your bosses are stakeholders. They might be information seekers. Who might be an information seeker about your program? Who's someone that might want information about your program or your organization?
Funders?
Funders, totally. Yep. Funders, community members, right? And then funders are a big one, or potential funders. Those directly involved with the evaluation subject. So the subject is the thing that you're evaluating. So if you're running a camp, stakeholders might be people that run camps, other similar camps in other parts of the country or other parts of this region, right? Because they're interested in the content, the subject matter. They might not know or care about your organization, but they care about best practices in summer camp or best practices in children's museum. Lots I'm thinking about the folks that you all are going to see at the conference that you're going to, or best practices in housing, or best practices in professional development circ team, right? Like that you all are doing a project that's internal on staff development. The number of folks that are interested across industry on staff development, huge, 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 huge. Your evaluation stakeholder group could be tremendous. So most programs or strategies or initiatives have lots of stakeholders. These are all examples of the types of people that we just talked about. What's interesting is that stakeholders often have very diverse and sometimes competing interests. So someone might want to know about your evaluation results because they're interested in best practices for your field. Someone else might want to know because they're trying to decide whether or not to fund you. And somebody else might want to know because they want to be sure their job's not going to be cut. Right? Very different interests related to your program and your evaluation. You need to make a decision as the evaluation team on which stakeholder groups are most relevant for you. Because what you're going to do is design your reporting in a way that is going to be relevant and digestible for the groups, the stakeholder groups that you prioritize. If you needed to report your findings in a way that were going to be ideal for every stakeholder, you would be creating 14 different reports for every data set that you have. As an evaluator, I don't even create 14 different types of reports for every data set that I have. It's certainly not a realistic expectation that you all with your full-time loads are going to be doing that with your data. You're going to create 1, 2, maybe 3 different slices, 3 different views from the same data set. So you need to decide how you're going to present that data and those findings in a way that will meet the needs of your primary stakeholders. So you all have to decide who those primary stakeholders are, right? So when we're talking about stakeholders, we're talking about potentially all of these different people, your staff, your current funders, your potential funders, your board, your participants, your external community members, your colleagues in the field. And then think about presentation strategies. What are some ways that we present information? So when we think about presenting findings, either in the chat or you can unmute and share them, what are some ways that we share that information? Give you an example. One might be in a PowerPoint deck, right? What's another one? How do we present information?
In
How do we present?
a final grant report.
Final grant report, monthly newsletter. Yep, keep going. There's a big fat list here. Annual report, absolutely. How else can we present information? Think about all this rich data that you're all getting. How else could you potentially present it to these different audiences?
Post it on your website.
Post it on your website. Samantha, go ahead. I saw you on mute. Yep, change your mind.
I was gonna say newsletter, but somebody said it.
That's fine. Newsletter, grant report, website, videos, reels. Yep. Keep going. What else? How else can we present information?
Pamphlets, also at a gala.
Handbooks, guidelines, new program policies, social media. Yeah. So all of these ways, let me see, your list is better than mine. So I had PowerPoint, newsletter, fact sheet, oral presentation, right? Talking with people, visual displays that could be like infographics, social media, reels, etc., video, storytelling. You could tell stories, you could write up vignettes that are stories that are based on data, press releases, big fat full evaluation reports and memos, right? Lots of different ways. Now envision this PowerPoint slide as a matching exercise, right? Where you pull one thing from the right column and one thing from the left column and match them up. And this answer will be different for each of your organizations. But when you think about your own staff, what might be the best strategy that works for your staff from these or any other ones you come up with? When you think about your current funders, and maybe you have to go deeper, funder by funder, what might be the best strategy that works or is required by your funders? What might be the best strategy for the funders that you want but don't currently have? What are they interested in? Take like 2 minutes and take down some notes matching them up, or at least jotting down whoever you think your key stakeholders are. And you might have a different list than the other people at your organization, right? Do this individually. We'll have time later to bring our lists together. Individually, jot down who you think your key stakeholders are, and then the presentation strategy that you think would work best for them, either because they require it, right? So if it's a funder and they require that you give them a 7 to 10 page report, well, then that's the one that works best for them. Or because they would be interested in it. I should have put this up. You can see it better. All right, so someone share with us one of their priority audiences and how you think you would present that information to them. There are no wrong answers here. This is your perspective of your organization and your stakeholder groups.
I'll go. I chose the board, and I said I would use a fact sheet.
Why a fact sheet? Why is the board one of the key groups that you picked, Crystal, and then why a fact sheet?
So CERC has a board of directors, actually some thinking personal, local, and immediate. And typically when we report back to them, it's on like factual information, our program, and what we've done thus far.
Makes sense to me. Does anyone else have board on their list of priority stakeholders for their organization? Does anyone else have a fact sheet? Oh, go ahead, Paul.
Oh, for the board, I think the full report and the executive summary would probably go hand in hand.
Why did you pick that for your board?
Well, you go through the process of gathering all the information. You know, some board members would want to see the full report. Others just want to skim and see what the executive summary says.
Yeah. So this is a great example actually, because the same category of audience, right, board of directors, for example, is going to want different things depending on the organization. So boards function very differently at different organizations. So a fact sheet might make total sense for an organization, for some organizational boards. A big fat 30-page report might make sense for a different board at a different organization. And often within a board, and you heard Paul allude to this, even within a board, there's going to be variability. You're going to have some board members that want to read the ins and outs and the details, and some that want a one-pager with 10 bullet points. Give me the key stuff. What do I need to know? How do we move this forward? So you are not realistically going to be able to meet the needs or the interests of every audience member that you have. You need to, as an evaluation team, pick the types of reports that are going to get the most leverage for the the most bang for your buck, for lack of another term. The ones that are going to meet the needs of most of your priority groups, or that you could easily pull from, right, if you needed to create other versions. I'm going to look at one more quick thing and then take our break. And that's a little bit of a plug for not making it to that last step too soon. That last step of like polishing the report and putting it out there too quickly. So there's a question here for those of you that are in analysis or reporting right now, which is a great pause point. Is there a natural opportunity to share some of the findings with stakeholders before you fully polish them and finalize them into a report? And the reason I ask that is twofold. For example, during your analysis, at a special convening, meaning when you pull them together to talk about this, like a meeting specifically around your findings. At an existing meeting, like a staff meeting, board meeting, et cetera, where you could talk about it, or just informally via email, calling them up, right, grabbing them in the hall. The reason you might want to do this is twofold. One is there's an opportunity to include them in the discussion and brainstorming about what do all these data mean? What do we do with them, right? You can include folks in that step. And the second is you can explicitly ask them the format that you think that they would want to receive the report in. So if you have a preliminary conversation with your board, for example, and you say, hey, we just did all of this data analysis. We want to pull you in and have some early brainstorming about what it might mean. We're in the middle of making sense of it right now, board. Would you like to engage with us in that process? Maybe it's not board. Maybe it's other staff at your organization. Maybe it's participants. Maybe you invite a subset of the people that answered the surveys to the table to say, hey, we're making sense of all that great information that you gave us. Here's what we see so far. What do you see here? Does this make sense to you? And then when we're done and we're writing all of this up, how can we present it back in a way that's going to be really meaningful to you? And using that information to feed your final decisions about reporting and presentation of data and action steps that you take. All right, let's take a break. We're going to break until 10:45, so I'll give you 3 extra minutes. 10:45, be back here, and we'll pick back up at that point. Thank you, Monica. So chances are, regardless of the methods that would be of priority for your key stakeholders, at some point you'll have to put together one of the ways that you're going to want or have to present your results are in sort of a full program evaluation report. Funders might want that, supervisors might want that, board might want that. Minimally, you should have that skill set in your back pocket, right? So even if you put together a bunch of one-pagers or videos or something else that might be more in line with what your audiences are looking for, you should know how to create a full evaluation report, and you should know how to receive and feel comfortable being the recipient of a full evaluation report if someone else is doing one for your program or your organization. So we're going to spend the next 10 minutes or so talking about strong program evaluation reports. Share my screen. These are the components of a strong program evaluation report. Remember, this is the big fat version of the report, right? This is like the soup to nuts version of the report. Your PowerPoint might not include this, your memo might not include this, your executive summary won't include this, your videos and your social media posts certainly won't include this, your press releases won't. But when you're writing the big fat version, you generally want to have an introduction, a method section, a findings section, and a conclusions section. Your intro includes description of your program or your organization or whatever it is that was the subject of the evaluation. And then the evaluation questions and why you even did this there. Your method section will talk about what you actually did. We did a survey, we did focus groups, we did a record review and interviews, whatever it was you actually did, when you administered it, when you did it, what that process was like. It was administered by staff, it was sent via email, whatever that looks like. Your findings section is your findings. What you found, this is where if you have graphs or tables or quotes, right, or photos, this is where you would include that. So what you learned, and then the so what, like what is the value of that? What is the impact of that? And then your conclusion is your action steps, right? If you're taking any, the next steps for the program, and any loose ends that we call in a technical term, issues for further consideration. So for example, oh, we did this 3 months after the program ended. In the future, we might want to consider, or we might doing it sooner, or also surveying this other group, or whatever changes you make, or whatever things came up that you might want to consider. Like we learned that while our evaluation question was about the program, we learned from people's write-in responses that they had a lot of feedback about our marketing efforts. So an issue for further consideration might be to delve more deeply into what we might want to change in terms of marketing, for example. You might notice, if you're paying really, really close attention, that the bullets here, the components of a strong program evaluation report, also generally mirror the things that you're going to share in our final presentation, right? Our BEC graduation presentation. Now that's going to be a 10-minute PowerPoint version, so it certainly won't be as thorough as what you would put in your evaluation report. But those same general components are the core that you want to send out or share out to say, here's what we did. In the resources section of the BEC website under session 9, there is a template or a little outline that you can keep, save it to your files for whenever you need it, of these general components. Gives you some space to fill in your own stuff, gives you some space to write who's responsible for writing this up and when the deadline is for writing it up, to help you in your program report writing process. You can use that now. You can also just save it for future report writing that you might do. So there's a resource there for you from a program evaluation report writing standpoint. Questions about the components before we talk about some things to remember when it comes to evaluation reporting? No, pretty straightforward. All right, so things to remember for evaluation reports. You want a strong report, you start with a strong outline, right? So start with an outline. Sit with your evaluation team and say, what are the things we want to write up? Bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, and then use that to write up the full report. This is the thing that we were just talking about. Your internal outline, including who's responsible for which sections, is really helpful to make this a manageable task. That resource can help with that, right? Because it tells you you write out who's responsible and when their section is due. One person doesn't have to do all of the writing. Evaluation reports can be onerous on a whole team, but certainly on a single individual. Ideally, we'll talk more about this in a minute, but ideally you leave some time for other people to review and edit too. I can also be one of those people, right, while we're in this process. So if you all are each writing individual parts of reports that you need to write, you are welcome. Some folks have already done this. You're welcome to send them to me. I am happy to do either a thorough line edit or a sort of higher level theoretical review and give you some feedback. Be economical in your decisions about what to include in your report, right? So just because it's the big fat version doesn't mean it needs to be 30 pages. Your big fat version might be 7 pages, right? And your shorter memo or executive summary might be 2. Longer doesn't necessarily mean better, doesn't mean it was a more thorough evaluation. You need to decide using your own best professional judgment what is important to include in the report. A good way to minimize what's in the actual report is to use appendices, because you could share the report with someone and leave off the appendix if they don't need that level of detail. So you might put your key findings in the report with only 1 or 2 graphs, and in an appendix, if you have 7 or 8 graphs, include the rest of them. So the people that only need the big overarching key things get the version that has 2, and the ones that want all of the additional detail and effort that you put in can get the version with the appendix, or can go look at the appendix so they can see the remaining 6. This sounds silly, but you want to be consistent about your headers, about your sections, about your bolding, about your underlining, right? Be thoughtful. Formatting can be a huge, huge asset so people know what to expect and understand where they are in the report. If you're consistent and thoughtful about your use of formatting, we use this font for the header at this size. We use this font or this bolding or this whatever it might be for key points. We underline these things consistently throughout. People will get used to the pattern, and that helps them digest the information. So be consistent about your formatting and use it to your advantage. Also, this is a small thing, but it makes things much easier. Number your pages. By default, Word does not number your pages for you. So you have to go in and manually add that if you want it to show on the report, but it's really helpful to have it so people can reference when they're reading it, people can reference when they're giving feedback, and it stays, and it's just a good, consistent process to maintain. A couple more things to remember. Go through, once you're done, and listen, I know this better than anyone. Once you're done with a report, the last thing you might want to do is go back and reread the whole thing. But you need to go back and reread the whole thing. If you can't understand it, if there's a part that you stumble over, a sentence, a paragraph, a transition, chances are others won't understand it or will stumble over it as well. This is especially important when multiple people are writing reports together. So if someone is writing the intro and someone else is writing the findings, or someone else is writing about the survey and a different person is writing about the focus groups, right? There's higher likelihood that A, there won't be consistency, and B, that something will be unclear because you're using different voice. So make sure it is easily understood. The same way we pilot our tools and we say, like, if you have a survey, give it to someone, like I give it to my son, right? Or give it to someone in your program that isn't affiliated with this evaluation. It would be great to give the report to an external, unaffiliated person and have them read it and give feedback. Again, that's just good evaluation practice, period. I mean, that some of this is really obvious, but you want to make sure there's Let me point out this whole thing first. Does anyone use Grammarly as a tool? I see a couple people nodding. So Grammarly is free. There's a paid version if you want to pay, but the base version of Grammarly is free. It is an add-on that you can download on your computer, and it runs your text through a grammar checker every time you use it. So you can turn it on and off for different things. I have it on for everything. I have it on for my email. I have it on for my presentations, like the PowerPoint. I have it on for my Word documents. And what it does is it puts a little icon in the corner. And if I click on it, it tells me all of the things that I might want to update or change in my language. So it becomes so it's written in standard grammar, English grammar conventions. So it's complete sentences in case I missed a period or a capital or whatever, capitalization. It also makes recommended language changes. So if I use a word and it's going to recommend a different word, so my sentence is clearer, it will recommend that. Once you get into the paid version, Kiara says the premium version is free for nonprofits. Is that true? Do people know? Can you tell people how to get that?
I'm gonna let Ashley do it because Ashley did it for our organization, but I think you just have to, when you're logging in, there's like a business form, and then you just say that you're a nonprofit, and you probably need to just put in your EIN number, and then it's free.
Ashley, does that sound right?
Ashley said yes.
So that's huge. So I paid for the premium. I was going to say, once I had the free version for a little while, I upgraded myself. P.S. I have no affiliation with Grammarly. I get no kickback. This is not a sales pitch at all. But I upgraded myself to the premium version. The premium version is good. So if you all can get the premium version for free, get the premium version. It gives me little reports about the tone of my emails, the tone of my writing. This is friendly. This is direct. This is confusing. This is whatever it might be. And it makes recommendations, right? So something like that is the equivalent of a line editor. When in the past, we'd give someone a report and say, read through this and catch, things that we need to underline and things that we need to capitalize and things that we need to add semicolons for. It's doing all of that for you. So I recommend working smarter and using tools like that you have access to, especially if they're free. That's even better, because it'll catch things for you. Allows you to focus on the content that you're writing. All right. Finally, final things to remember, none of this is new. We've talked about all of this before. Use tables and graphs to help illustrate your findings, right? Make sure that they have legends or keys so people know how to use them or read them, or footnotes, whatever additional identifying information needs to be around them so they can live on their own. Use quotes and vignettes or snippets from your notes to illustrate your findings. Right, this is where that qualitative data becomes really, really rich and makes the report not feel so dry. When we have quotes in a report, we should put quotation marks around them and then attribute them not necessarily to the specific speaker. So you're not going to say Khalifa said XYZ, but you might say a program participant said, right? Or a survey respondent said. And then if you're putting in any notes, they should be in context. So if you need to add stuff around them to make it clear, add that stuff around them. And then with the exception of issues for further consideration, you don't want to introduce any new topics in the final section of your report, right? That's something that you do earlier on. And then the final section is just the summary. Last set of evaluation reporting tips. Findings can be and really should be communicated in numerous forms. We said before, you're not going to create 14 different versions of a report. Absolutely not. But if you can create a report and then create an executive summary, or create a report and then create a couple of social media posts, or create a report and then do a shorter version that you put up on your website, right? With a link, a paragraph summary on your website with a link to the full report. The different ways that you can slice your findings for the purposes of sharing them out, the better. Think about internal and external reporting. Internal is the stuff you're going to share with your other staff members, with your bosses, with your teams, with your board. External reporting, the stuff you're going to share with funders, the stuff you're going to put on your website, the stuff you're going to share with at conference presentations, right? Things might look different when they're internal versus when they're external. So you want to think about what makes sense to share internally and what makes sense to share externally. Where do you think you're sharing more depth, internal or external? Are we sharing more depth internally or external? Yeah, Danielle says internally. That's right. Right? So we tend to share more detail, more depth internally with our staff teams, with our supervisors, with our colleagues, than we would share externally with funders, with public, on websites, at conferences, etc. We talked about this already. Plan for multiple reports or different slices or ways that we can look at the data. And then we just talked about this before the break. Before you start writing, consider ways to engage stakeholders in sense making and discussions about what that report could look like. The earlier we engage our primary or our priority stakeholders, the more invested they are. People support what they help to create, right? People support what they help to create. If you invest in, if you engage them earlier, they are more likely invested in your outcomes. So if you engage folks during sense making, right, that analysis phase where we go, all right, what do we do with this now? What does this mean? Or we engage them earlier and say, hey, how should we write this up? How would you want to see this? They're more likely to fully engage with it later. Minimally, it's good practice to develop an outline and share that outline with your stakeholders, even if you don't engage them in discussion and sense making, because that doesn't make sense, you don't have time, or they're not interested. Minimally develop an outline and share that and say, hey, we're putting together a report. Here's the outline that we're working from. Do you have any edits, thoughts, feedback before we go back and write this whole thing? Doing that potentially saves you a lot of time and effort if you go down a path that doesn't align with what they need, and increases the likelihood that they're engaged in the final product. These last two bullets are about if you are the recipient of an evaluation report. So outside of anything that you're developing right now for this evaluation project or future reports that you write, you might work with an external evaluator at some point, or someone else that will be doing an evaluation and you will be the recipient of, right? You are commissioning an evaluation. So 2 tips when you are the recipient of evaluation reports. The first is the reverse of what we just said. Ask that you see the outline before they write the thing. Or even more so, ask that you're included in sense making and reporting discussions before they even make the outline. A really good practice on the part of external evaluators is to say, we're going to collect all of this data for you from your participants. We're going to go back and analyze it. And then we're going to meet with you for a sense-making session. We're going to bring to you what we are interpreting from these data, and we're going to talk about it. And then once we talk about it, then we're going to go back and write up an evaluation outline, a report outline, and then share that. That is a collaborative evaluation process, even though you are the one receiving the report. Right? And there is no reason you can't ask for that when you are the one commissioning it. So if your external evaluator is not offering that, you can absolutely ask for it. Minimally ask for the outline in advance. And if you want to be involved in those sense-making discussions, ask to be involved in those discussions. And then if you are reviewing someone else's report, just because they're final or they look flashy, do not assume that they are final or look flashy, right? Review them carefully for components, for meaningfulness. If something is not clear, there is no reason you can't say, hey, this doesn't work for me. Can we edit this? Can we make this clearer? You absolutely have the power to say those things when you receive what you think is a final report. If it is not final by your standards, it's not final, period. So if you're commissioning a report, remember that. Again, this is if someone else is providing you the report when you're on the receiving end of it. You can absolutely go back and ask that they make changes, tighten some things up, make something clearer, etc. Questions or feedback about any of that? All right, we're going to do an exercise in our staff team. So in a few minutes, you're going to go into breakout rooms. You're going to have 20 minutes with your team. So it's a sufficient, it's a pretty meaty amount of time. You're going to have 20 minutes to go back to your own findings. So if you've already analyzed some data, great, pull some of those findings. If you haven't, that's fine. You want to go back to those notes that you took of your key audiences and the types of evaluation reports for those audiences, the thing we were doing before the break. And you want to start there. And what you want to do is either select the findings and write down, talk about how you're presenting those findings to your stakeholder audiences, right? Those priority ones. When you would present it, how you would present it, right? Minimally, you want to leave those 20 minutes with having had some discussion, and ideally you've come to consensus around your key stakeholders and the types of reports that you need to develop with your findings from those stakeholders. So you can ignore, if everything on the screen right now is overwhelming, you can ignore that. Your goal is to leave that meeting with consensus on your team around who are our key audiences that we need to prioritize and what are the types of report presentations that make sense for those audiences. So you know what you need to develop. If you've already developed stuff, the discussion then becomes, do we need to create this in other formats? Right? We've already developed a 2-pager. Do we need a longer report? Do we need so you're thinking, you're having conversation around your audiences and the types of reports that you need to develop for those audiences. Bring your notes back. We're going to have a debrief in 20 minutes when we come back together. Okay? All right. I'm going to stop recording, and Monica's going to send us off. All right, welcome back. So let's talk about this for a couple of minutes. Who are your audiences? What type of formats and presentations do we need for them? Who wants to share out?
So I can go. So we talked about who we would share. It would be with our staff, and it would be orally and probably with a PowerPoint. Our board, we would do the same thing because that's usually how we present to our board. Funders, we would report with a report. With our staff, we would do it during a team meeting. With the board at a board meeting. Funders as needed when they're looking for information, we would share that with them. Overall takeaways was the results that, because we said earlier, we're still really low in our numbers. So we have about 9 right now surveys as people do as they leave the shelter. So overall, the feedback was really positive with feeling like the culture was a good place and safe and resources. However, the one takeaway has been staffing at night because it's open 24/7. And we don't have YWCA staff there at night, but we do have contracted staff. So that's something that they would like to see more of, actual staff. So we thought with findings and what we could do and how we could use that is that we would present that to funders with maybe getting a grant that could cover salary for a night shift.
That's great. I really like the example, that finding that Tina just shared, because it's actionable for them in terms of programming, right? So we want to find staff that can cover a night shift, and then it's actionable from a case-making standpoint too, from a communication standpoint, because it also involves, you heard Tina say, funding or writing to a funder to say, hey, these are the findings from our evaluation. Can we get a grant to support this? So that action that they're taking is both programmatic and also communication and case making from the same single finding. So a really, really good example. So thank you for sharing. Let's hear from another group. What are you sharing out? Who are your priority audiences, and what is the format that they would want to see things in?
Okay, so Connecticut's will go next. So for us, it's pretty much honestly the same. So for board, of course, we would share the information at board meetings. So for the board, sometimes it's a little bit, it depends. So we do have where it's, bullet points and written, but we also know that the board likes simplified things. So we want to use infographics as well. And obviously those will be done at the board meeting. And the executive director typically has a slideshow or a deck that they utilize during those meetings. So that would be the case for them. And for our donors and funders, typically, of course, there's reports. And so in those reports, we fill out how they want the information to be shared. But of course, we also have our annual report. And then we also always share our social media platforms and our website that also has that information in like infographics and video formats that are, much cuter and that share a story rather than just the data. So what I guess that's qualitative data from the kids, and then for the parents and the mentors and I guess alumni if they were interested, and then this community at large, it would be the newsletters and our social media that we utilize. And of course those again would be easier jargon, infographics, pictures, videos, testimonials, things like that. And yeah, that's for us, I think.
I'd love to highlight something that you just shared too, Kara, because I think it's really important that your evaluation reports, while you want them to be thorough and show the rigor of your work, should feel like they're coming from your organization, right? So if your organization is young and fun and child-oriented or art-based or whatever it is, your reporting, your tools, or not your tools, your presentations, all of that should follow suit, right? Especially when you're doing it in-house. So you might have the big fat version of your report, but that could still look and feel like, in your case, a Connecticut's thing, right? A Connecticut's product. So you use some terms like fun and cute, right? And stories, and like that should all still exist in the realm of evaluation. It's just existing with this data set. And that's sometimes hard for people to pull off. Like they feel like it has to be this very different formal thing. And the people that do it, the times it works really well are when you're able as an organization to marriage your organizational culture and point of view with this rigor. It's not necessarily easy, but when you pull it off, it works really, really nicely. So I appreciate that you're thinking about that.
Thank you. Oh, and I guess the last thing that we'll share is that we were just talking about for our observations that we are going to be doing. That's data points that we're not going to be like putting in reports or things like that. That's just for internal for us and to make sure that we're continuously updating and making adjustments to the program to make it the highest quality possible. So there are some data that we utilize and it's just internal. It's not for reporting purposes.
Great. You still might want to reference that in your external reporting, like, hey, we do this for a program improvement, but absolutely right. You don't need to share the findings, right? Or the themes from that externally. Fantastic. Let's hear from another group.
We went into a lively conversation about video and how we could utilize that to reach various key stakeholders. And while I think sometimes it could feel like a heavy lift, we're thinking about what we have already created and kind of natural points to capture the outcomes between our teachers and our teaching artists and our students after a residency could really make a huge impact.
Yeah, that's another, so I appreciate that you brought that up, because it's another point where, again, sort of this idea of like finding a method that mirrors the culture of your organization. If the data that you collected naturally, or your interventions and your programming naturally are engaging, right? If it's art in some way, and that is a natural interest of people, lean into that and make that part of the evaluation that you're sharing out. So it's a clip of something with then, 98% of the people that engaged, that participated in what you just saw felt this way. Or it's one of you voicing over, right? Like some visual that is being seen. And so there's an opportunity to embed that, in your case, the art, right into the evaluation reporting in a way that will make it naturally be more engaging than some other less media centered or less creative programs that might exist. So lean into it because you all have it. Another group.
So from the LUTs, we were primarily looking at municipal and state legislators. Maybe doing an oral presentation with an executive summary with those folks.
To what end, Patricia? With what goal in mind?
To continue to be included in the state and municipal budget.
Yeah. So this is a really important point. So when you're getting public funding like that, you need to be really thoughtful and strategic about ensuring that you're kind of placing yourself in the center of those conversations as much as you can, because it's easy, right? Or easier in those settings to fall by the wayside. Your group in particular, I think, would get some, so the materials that you're putting together for the conference presentation, you'll probably get a lot of leverage for these conversations that you're talking about now. So you'll get a lot of, you should be able to use that presentation multiple times. So that'll be good. Mutual housing, Girl Scouts, Cirque teams, and Connecticut's, I'm sorry, Camp Current.
I think most of our data, we really see this as internal to the senior staff, to the property management department, as a way of really getting that quick feedback and improvement loop going. So, I think the key stakeholders are going to be, at least at first, since we're going to be we're rolling these out once a month at different properties. The key stakeholders would be the internal staff. I think eventually, there really won't be a final report because it's going to be ongoing. But I think on an annual basis, we would be reporting to the board in some sort of a format that, probably a PowerPoint with some sort of data points and examples. And we want to be able to show over time progress that we're making towards better service for our residents.
Yeah. There's something really interesting, and two things that I want to point out in Paul and Yandidis's project. One, like the Cirque team, so maybe Cirque, you go next, because there's some synergy here. Your focus is primarily internal, right? So this is really about internal change or improvement, which is a really nice place because it naturally makes your work actionable, right? So that part is really nice. The other part is there's something that Paul, he mentioned it earlier in his update, and he just alluded to it again. And I don't know if folks outside of the team fully got it, so I'm going to underscore it. This is a cyclical process that the mutual housing team developed, where they have these meetings and follow up with the survey, and then have a meeting with a different set of units or housing, and then follow up with the survey. So the survey is the same, right? It's just getting administered to different groups. That is a natural place for you to be able to develop a reporting template, which means it has these pieces in it. And after each survey administration, when you're analyzing, you pop that stuff in, and then that report is already set and looks the same. You're changing the date, you're changing the title, you're changing the data because it looks different for each administration. But the hard work of laying out the report only has to happen once. And you're essentially copying and pasting, and others have done that too. I think Hartford Performs, you do that with your residencies, right? I think various groups have done that, but when you have repetition in your programming or in your delivery, you can create shells and then just put the information into the shells, and it saves you some of the work of that. Circ team, do you want to go next?
Sure, I can start, and then Crystal can hop in if I miss anything, which I'm sure I will. Yes, it is staff that we are working with primarily for this project. Some of the things that we talked about were making sure that we had a collective time when we were asking them to complete surveys in order to get 100%. We got close to 100% response rate, but for something as critical as this, because we're asking for their input on something that's going to affect them, professionally as they're putting together their goals for the year, we really wanted 100% rate. So we thought next time we do this, we might want to set aside 15 minutes at that staff meeting, making sure they're all bringing their electronic devices with them, finishing the survey right then and there. We did go back and forth a little bit about handwritten options for folks that were there. And then I was like, if we're asking questions that, could identify people, right, we might not want the handwriting to be connected to them. Like I said, I think out of 43 people, we were missing 7 or 8 people, which in hindsight doesn't seem like a big number, but for something like this where we're really looking for everybody's input, it just makes more sense to have everybody's rather than missing a few.
Yeah. Crystal, anything you wanted to add to that?
I don't think so. I think she mentioned everything. I think, the important piece about having everybody participate is really that, to Christy's point, that is going to affect them in some way. So in many ways, our information will be ongoing as well. So we'll be changing as we're going through the process, because something may work at one particular moment in time, and then it may not work later on. And then the other thing we have to consider is that it's for various roles also. So their position and responsibilities may be different, and what that looks like will be different too.
There's a natural, so there are a couple of strategies that we can use to get more response rates for things like this. One, Christy and Crystal just talked about, and it was, again, this isn't the best terminology, but it's what historically we've used in research, where we say when you have a captive audience, right? Meaning like you have them in front of you, you give them the survey right when they're right there. So Christy talked about like 15 minutes at the end of the staff meeting, making them do it right there, or asking them to do it right there, so that way they get it while they're present. That's certainly one way to do it. Another one, though, another one is incentives, right? If you incentivize it, it increases the likelihood of people doing it. But a third one that you all can use to your advantage, Circ team, and others could as well, when you start sharing feedback back. If you share these findings back in a staff meeting or something else, and then you're showing that you're making decisions based on what you learned from the surveys, that will increase the likelihood that next time that same group has opportunity to take a survey, they will not only do it, but take it seriously, because they're seeing that it's being used. So when you know you're going to be surveying the same subset of people over and over again, even more reason for you to share back the findings and the so what, the action, with that group before the next survey administration takes place. Because if they see that it is actually actionable and you are actually making decisions based on those actions, they are more likely, when they have the opportunity in the future, to take the instrument again and to take it even more seriously. And all of you, I think, maybe not every single group, but most of the groups here have some subset of your population that you would be resurveying year after year, right? So it's what for that subset of people, it's important that they see that you are using this and doing something with it. Camp Current and Girl Scouts, who wants to go?
I can go. So our audience would be the C team, and we would do a PowerPoint, visuals, and oral presentation, and then also the camp staff for the fact sheet with visuals. We would deliver that ASAP, and I think, Elena, we've talked about it when you helped us out, like we would use some of that data that they would get weekly if they handed it out weekly, to kind of make changes for the upcoming week if you know they were minimal enough. And there's not really anything to surprise because we set it up to where they can write an explanation. So there's not anything really to infer. As Danny would say, that's the data. She's my data guru, so I take her wording. And then we would just, you know, use that data to make our summer camp program, you know, better for our girls and, you know, and the parents. But unfortunately, Danny and I are in the reporting part of things, so we don't really have anything to do directly related to what changes are made to the actual summer camp program.
But in theory, if you're providing, and I've always loved this about your approach, if you're able getting to the point where you can provide that data in real time, right? Here's based on this week what they said, you have another week coming up, that becomes an even more valuable to the people that are running the camp, in theory, right?
Right.
Then they encourage people to take the survey because they know they're going to get that back, and it just becomes a really, really good program improvement. So
right, and use that for pre-planning for the next camp season if you couldn't make some of, you know, the rest of those changes. So yeah.
Exactly. Yep. It's good. Camp Current.
We're focusing on our junior leader program, which is our year-round program. And a lot of the success around that program is linked to community stakeholders and engaging members of the community who might be like mentors or partners with us. So in terms of thinking of them as the audience, not only are we focusing on just like the organization as a whole and its history, which might be shared out through like our videos and through our website, but in terms of engaging those partners, probably more like one-pagers and just like thinking about the different networking opportunities our staff goes to be able to share out brief information about that program and work to get them engaged.
Yeah, I love that. And it also makes me think too of a strategy that we've seen work out really nicely, where when you have a lot of community interests, so either community stakeholders that need to contribute to your program for it to be successful, or you want to build more uptake in your community and connection, hosting, it's work for the folks that do it, but hosting some sort of event like an open house or a networking meeting or something where you're sharing back like, hey, you all are great partners to this program. We want to share with you some of what we've learned. And you share a little bit of your findings, but you also make it about networking and food and whatever else you can do for folks is a really nice way to share that out in convening style, in addition to any one-pagers or other collateral sort of material you're going to be developing. But when there's a community stakeholder element, bringing together community around it, around your findings can be a nice way to sort of like wrap everything up nicely. And Camp Current's not the only one in that position. Lots of thinking about you and the relationships you have with your community, and there's a couple of other groups that might be interested in a strategy like that too. Good work, everybody. Good work. We're getting closer and closer, and I love it. Any overarching questions or thoughts that people have about today's content that we haven't gotten to? Reporting, how we use that data. All right, so let me just pull up my wrap-up slide. And there's not much on here, but I'm putting it up because sometimes folks like a visual to be able to see along with what we're talking about. So 3 next steps. 1, session survey. So we'll put it in the chat in just a minute. You'll also get it via email when Monica sends the follow-up email, but this is the same. Oh, there it is. It's that quick 5-minute Qualtrics survey, just asks for a quick feedback on today's session. So please complete that ASAP. Will only take you a couple of minutes. The sooner you do it while everything's still fresh, the better. Number 2, as always, email any questions or follow-up discussion that we need to have. You all are, as you know, at different points in your evaluation project. And I'm leaning on you when you hit points that need additional feedback or meetings or discussions, right? I'm leaning on you to reach out to me when those moments come so we can schedule our one-on-ones. Our one-on-ones will continue as scheduled in general, but you might need something different on a different time frame than what we have scheduled. So just reach out as you need, and we'll schedule some time via phone or Zoom or whatever it is and work on what we need to work on. So reach out if you have any questions or we need to talk. And then per our schedule, Monica just put in the chat the link to the October Calendly. So please go in. I gave us like a good chunk of the month, depending on what's going on for each of you. So you can pick your day and time for your follow-up meeting. So make sure you schedule that in addition to any other one-on-ones we need to have to move things forward. You'll get both of these links via email as well in a little bit, but if you want to grab them now so you don't lose them and open them up in a web browser, it's the survey and it's the calendar. So the only homework that you have outside of these 3 to-dos, continue working on wherever you are in your project, collecting data, analyzing data, etc. And then put your heads together as a team. I recommend sooner rather than later starting to think about your presentation. Remember, that'll be due on November 30th. So you've got time, but we all know how quickly the fall will do its fall thing, and it'll be November 30th before we know it. All right, with that, you can have 6 minutes back in your day. Thank you for joining us today, for your engagement. That was session 9 out of 10. Oh my goodness. I'll stick around for a couple of minutes if people have questions or want to talk, but otherwise, have a great week. Talk to you all soon. Thank you. See ya.